Record-breaking temperatures have been spreading across Europe as it bakes in extreme heat. Some places have seen highs of over 45 degrees Celsius, with wildfires, evacuations, and many deaths reported. So, are these severe heat waves now becoming the new climate reality for Europe? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, as wildfires rage and heat waves become routine, European cities are scrambling to adapt, from rethinking urban planning to upgrading ageing infrastructure. But is this enough to cope with the rising temperatures? What are the dangers of extreme heat as it becomes a regular feature of European summers?
Wildfires are once again ripping through southern Europe, and one of the hardest hit places is the Greek island of Crete.
We were at the balcony, we saw the first flames, which become bigger at a very short time.
It's raising further questions about the impact of climate change. And the toll isn't just environmental, it's human. In 2023, nearly 48,000 people died from heat-related causes in Europe, the second highest figure since records began in 2015. And the impact of wildfires has increased. Across the EU, over 196,000 hectares have burned since January, more than double the area burned in the same period last year. Meanwhile, in cities like Paris, extreme heat is becoming the new summer normal, forcing people and systems to adapt.
We wake up early, and as a result, we often end up staying up late as well. When the afternoon heat becomes particularly intense, we take the opportunity to visit museums where there's at least some air conditioning.
Below ground, Paris is preparing for even hotter summers. Paris's electricity provider is replacing old cables, originally installed in the 1970s and 80s, which can no longer withstand today's soaring temperatures. Europe is under pressure and in transition. As wildfires become more frequent and summers get hotter, the cost of inaction becomes harder to ignore.
Well, let's meet our guests. Here with me in the studio, we have Glada Lahn. Glada is a senior research fellow for the Environment and Society Centre. That's at Chatham House in London. In Reading, in Berkshire in England, we have Samantha Burgess. She is Deputy Director of the Copernicus Climate Change Service. That's at the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. In Istanbul, we have Pauline Seifert. She is the founder and chairman of a DIERA group. And joining us from Geneva in Switzerland, we have Margaret Harris. She's a public health doctor. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Glada, to you first off, it's not a case anymore of if we're going to get a heat wave. It's almost a case of how many heat waves we're going to get in Europe. How concerned are you?
Right, very concerned. This has definitely become rapidly the new normal in Europe. We're seeing longer periods of heat. We're seeing more intense periods. We're seeing earlier periods as well that are interfering with harvests. In 2023, there were over 47,000 deaths across Europe that were related to heat. I don't know how many more we're going to see this year. It's a very, very serious health issue. It's a food security issue. It's a political issue.
Samantha, to you, I read the phrase last week, Europe was covered by a heat dome. I've never heard that before. I mean, what we're seeing now in all your experience of working in the weather, how different is this kind of heat?
So we've always had heat dome-like events. So a heat dome is effectively a high pressure system that's very stable. And it gets stuck, if you will. So we've always had these high pressure systems that lead to hotter than average temperatures and sunnier than average temperatures, because the way these heat domes work is we've got hot air in the upper atmosphere that gets pushed down. As it gets pushed down, it warms up, which warms up where we live. and it also pushes away the clouds. So depending on the meteorological dynamics or the dynamics of the weather, they can be very stable for days or weeks at a time. But what was unusual about the one that we saw at the end of June, early July, was it was more intense. It impacted a larger area of Europe than normal, and it lasted quite a long time. So we were seeing temperatures that would normally be seen in late July, early August, and we were seeing those record temperatures at the end of June.
So, Pauline, is this the new reality now for European climate, that every summer we're going to see more of these heat domes, more heat waves, and we should be getting concerned?
Well, I think compared to my childhood, from the north of Germany, I've been living in Turkey for the past 6 years. I mean, here we are fairly used to hot weather, but even here you can see the effects currently. It's been getting very, very hot in Istanbul as well. But I remember last week when we had this recent heat wave in Germany, for the first time ever, my family was telling me that they didn't have water because the pressure in the pipes, I guess, rapidly decreased. So in Hamburg, there was a lack of water supply, which I find very, very surprising and very shocking. And we can also see wildfires in Germany currently that are they're still trying to get under control. So you can definitely see a shift in more extreme weather, both during the summer, but also during the other seasons in Germany as well.
Margaret, to you, Glada mentioned the figure there, 47,000 people last year dying of heat-related ailments as a result of increasing heat across Europe. How seriously should governments be taking this now? Because these are not one-off events.
Exactly. And in fact, we've did a study comparing heat-related deaths between 2004 and 2017, 2021, and they increased by approximately 85%. And we found that there were between 2000 and 2019, at least 489,000 heat-related deaths. 45% of these were in Asia, but 36% in Europe. And that's really a very big difference.
And Margaret, when people pass away as a result of the heat, is this because of overexposure or dehydration? Just talk me through. Obviously, everyone is different, but I'm guessing it just affects people in different ways.
Well, yes, but it's really because the skin is your largest organ in the body. And if you're exposed, if your skin is your temperature control organ. So if the heat rises above what works for the body, which is above 37 degrees particularly, but it can be at lower heats, the skin works very, very hard to try to get rid of that heat. And all the blood flow goes to your skin. It goes away from your gut, and your gut starts to have problems and releases toxins. It also goes away from your heart. Now, if you're a young, fit, healthy person, you can probably deal with that. You know, it's a strain on your system, but you can deal with that. But if you're older and you've already got underlying heart disease or lung disease, that will be enough to tip you over. And so that's how most people die. That's how most of the heat-related deaths occur. You can have heat stroke, which is absolutely just the heat, and that can happen to anybody if they are overexposed to heat. But it's really about the underlying situation in your body, and then exacerbated by what your body is trying to deal with when exposed to too much heat.
Thanks, Margaret. Glada, we saw last week Spain, the hottest day in Spanish history, 46 Celsius in a town called Huelva, near the border with Portugal. Portugal itself had its hottest day, 46 Celsius too. We're getting very close to 50 Celsius in Europe at some point in the next couple of summers.
Yeah, I don't know when that might happen, but we are trending that way. We've seen since 2023 regular breaches of that 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than the pre-industrial temperatures. It's a very serious issue for health, as Margaret said, once it reaches really over 35. So when we're talking about 50 degrees, we saw last year in Riyadh during the Hajj period, I think over 1,000 were died due to that heat wave. Tragically, that's the kind of thing that can happen when people are outside. So there has to be very stringent measures and precautions put in place in readiness for that to make sure people are not exposed.
But here in Europe, our towns and cities, our homes, our workplaces, we're not built for this extreme heat. We don't have the infrastructure.
And I'd say that's the first place to concentrate. Look at buildings, look at the built environment. We're seeing increasing urbanization. It's a place to realistically start. It also can create a whole lot of business opportunities. I mean, I'd love to see more shading, more insulation for cooling, retrofitting, you know, big, large-scale plans to particularly focused on the lower income housing, which is often the most neglected. And there's a lot of opportunity for that. I think the European Union is going to put out a consultation soon to see what people want to see in terms of adaptation. And there's this wrangle over, you know, more aircon versus more insulation. And I hope that we err on the side of the insulation plus the cooling that greener cities could provide as well, the use of trees and gardens, and you know, also the preparedness techniques and the awareness raising of what people should do in these kind of temperatures.
Samantha, how long is it going to take, do you think, until we see a day in Europe one summer where we reach 50 Celsius?
Oh, that's a tricky question. So the record temperature for Europe right now was back in August 2021 in Sicily, and the record temperature for Europe is 48.8 degrees. What I find really interesting is the World Meteorological Organization did a thought experiment after the Paris Agreement was signed a decade ago with example forecasts for the year 2050. And with these example forecasts, it showed the temperatures that we saw a week ago in June in Portugal and in France and in Spain in these forecasts that were hypothetical a decade ago, but also for 25 years into the future. So we know with climate change, the atmosphere is warmer than it otherwise would be. And we also know that extreme events such as heat waves are warmer than they otherwise would be. It's always hard ahead of time to predict how extreme they will be, but we know we will get more of them. So we need to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible and adapt to climate change now. Climate change is not a future problem. It's impacting everyone around Europe already. And many countries, particularly European countries, our infrastructure is adapted to much colder weather. So we're used to keeping the heat within buildings rather than keeping it outside of buildings. So we really need to adapt very rapidly to ensure that people can stay cool wherever they are.
So Pauline, some of those predictions that Samantha mentioned, we've reached those targets ahead of the predicted schedule. I mean, Europe's leaders really need to start making a plan and drawing up plans for a heat health policy every summer, surely.
Well, I think that when you look at political leaders around the world, they're pretty much aware of the climate change problem. We have COP that has been held as a global conference where these topics are discussed. And I think at the end of the day, when we look at the results that are coming out of these conferences and what political leaders are currently doing, we can see that they are taking the topic seriously. In Turkey, for example, last week, the climate law was passed, which is circled around climate action. Also here in Turkey, we've heard that we have to adapt to the changing environment due to climate change, but I think we also need to still follow up on what we can do to inhibit, to stop climate change, right? And here, energy consumption, energy production, this is kind of the area where I'm coming from, is I think a very, very important aspect. When we look at the primary energy consumption of countries globally, we can still see a fairly large share of fossil fuels that is decreasing, and it has been decreasing. And we also need to start investing more and more in energy efficiency, and also here both in the European Union and Turkey action plans have been established and measures are being taken, and I think this is really a path that we need to follow to continue to slow down actually the climate change prospectively. We can see that renewable energy as in terms of installed capacity has been growing both both in Germany and in Turkey. In Germany, for example, we have reached over 95 gigawatts in installed capacity of solar, which is an immense amount, and this will continue. But of course, with that, we will also need a lot of investment that is required to adapt our infrastructure to it, grid transformation investments that are required, and also, of course, continuous investment in renewable energy sources.
Thanks, Pauline. Margaret, to you, do you think European leaders are taking this issue seriously enough?
There certainly are quite some initiatives to do something about mitigating the effects of health. So there's something called the Alliance for Transformational Change, which the World Health Organization has been sort of overseeing, but it's really a countrywide initiative, and they are trying to build up the health sector, to deal with what they know is an increasing health problem.
So you think they're actually aware that this needs addressing, that they are putting the legwork in now for future years?
They are aware, but much, much more needs to be done. And what really needs to be done is what the other people, panelists, have mentioned, the changes for prevention. So there is work to look at mitigation in the health system, accepting that climate change is certainly here, but things like also training health workers to recognize the effects of overexposure to heat and to deal with it rapidly, but also the prevention things like increasing shading. If you go to schools in Europe, most of the playgrounds are wide open, no shades, no trees, insisting that kids go out always with hats, that they don't go out in the hot weather. Even things like informing parents never to cover a stroller with a dry cloth, because that will increase the heat for the child, and to always use a wet cloth. There's a lot of information that needs to be out there to really protect the people who are exposed, and that's not really coming through.
Glada, to you, a lot of right-wing populist leaders don't believe in climate change. They certainly don't believe in net zero targets. They've no interest in this. How much of an issue is that, do you think, in Europe and indeed the wider world, when you have President Trump and his views on climate change?
I think, first of all, I'm not sure whether they don't actually believe in climate change. I think everyone can see what's happening. I think there are some efforts to manipulate what's going on in order to gain more power, more popularity. So we always have to evaluate that. I think it's being used, it's highly politicized now, especially the net zero policies for energy transition have been weaponized to an extent to cause division. There's a lot of disinformation, misinformation around. I also think on a global level, we see leaders making decisions in a context of extreme uncertainty of the kind that they haven't faced before. And the traditional, the assumptions that the traditional right and left are based on are no longer there, either in terms of the need for workers and jobs and what's happening with AI and automation, challenging that, to a stable climate, which was taken for granted. So we have these decisions being made in flux, and I think for some politicians, it's that very short-termist, let's see how much power and popularity we can grab over the short term, and for others, for leaders, it could be how much land and resources they look to hold on to or expand their realm of influence into in order to hang on to more power in a very uncertain time. So I think that's going on. I think, as you saw from at a more national level, as you saw with the heat wave in France the other week, Marine Le Pen was drawing attention to the unfairness, playing the inequality card in terms of who had access to cooling and who didn't. And her party was promising to institute air conditioning in schools and residential homes. And that seems like a very fair point, but it's also not looking at the preventative side that we're hearing about. And it's really, again, trying to sow this division, which is really the traditional left field, in terms of inequality, but it's being used in that way by the far right too now.
Thanks, Glada. Samantha, to you, Talk to me about the wildfires we've seen in some corners of Europe this summer. They will become, I'm sure, just a regular occurrence every summer with these temperatures?
Yes, that's right. So not only are we seeing wildfires in summer, but we're also seeing wildfires in spring and in autumn as well. And this is one of the challenges and the feedbacks that happens with heat waves. With heat waves, we get drier conditions, so we get more drought conditions, and we get a drier fuel load, so drier vegetation, which means we have a much greater risk of wildfire weather. It doesn't necessarily mean we'll get the wildfires, but already for this year, for 2025, we've seen record wildfires in Ireland in spring because it was an incredibly dry spring. And now in the early midsummer, we're seeing wildfires across Europe. One of the really critical points is that Europe is the fastest warming continent on the planet. So we have that fact, that scientific fact, which means we need to adapt. And I just highlighting what one of the other panelists has said, climate change is not about belief. The scientific evidence is overwhelmingly clear, and it's been overwhelmingly clear for decades. And we have the technological solutions to adapt and mitigate. So in answer to, installing air conditioning is not about installing air conditioning, it's about cooling our cities, making our cities greener. We know there's a 5 to 10 degree temperature difference if we're in a leafy, shady park compared with a high-rise part of a city with lots of glass, reflective substances and tarmac. So we need to green our cities, as some European cities are already doing, and ensure there are cool refuges where people can go for free to cool down, rather than installing more electrical capacity and not retrofitting buildings.
Pauline, to you, are we reaching a stage then in Europe where do you think some employers will have to start changing the working day, that we may see, same as they have in Spain, a siesta, a mid-afternoon break, and then people perhaps working later into the evening? Are we going to see changes to working life to reflect the heat?
I mean, at the end of the day, even during the corona pandemic, we've seen that people in the work environment, both on the employee and employer side, can adapt quickly. We've seen new models of working from home. But from my experience working in Germany, I can tell that, no, we don't have air conditioning installed in many places. And I think there will also be shifts that have to be done, adaptations to the workplace, especially in terms of strong heat waves, where we have to also, for example, in Northern Europe, maybe think of installing air conditioning. But for that, you will also need then more electricity, right? And so again, this is connecting back to also the meaning and the impact of the energy transition that we need to continue to follow, where we need to decarbonize our energy systems in Europe. And for that, we need immense investments. And we can see that in the EU, on a national and also on a European level, and also in Turkey, that policymakers are taking these schemes seriously.
Margaret, I see the European Union remains committed to net zero by 2050. I mean, that needs to speed up, doesn't it?
Well, actually, everything we can do to slow down climate change, stop climate change, needs to be done. And we've got to be serious about what the previous panelists said about getting to carbon zero, because that is what's put us in this situation in the first place, no matter what political spin is put on it. But we also have to understand, as has been said over and over again, it is here now, and we have to find ways to live with the mess we've created. So taking all those actions, understanding that we're going to see more of it. Europe is now a hot place. I remember when I first came to Europe, I'm from Australia, I was like, Europeans do not do heat well. Now, Europeans have to become heat experts, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Margaret. Glada, just final point to you, from an Australian who came here years ago. Our climate has changed beyond recognition. 46 Celsius in Europe in summer, and we're only going one way, and it's up.
Yep, and I agree with the other panelists. I mean, we have to act fast on this. We also have to make sure it's in line with a vision for a healthier, more livable, better society. I think that there's a lot of kind of catastrophe pictures being drawn, but actually we can rebuild and we can reform the way that we live so that it's much nicer, it's much greener, it's much cooler. And I think those are the things that politicians need to concentrate on while dealing with the very real and critical realities of things like food security, water supplies, electricity generation, which is also under risk from heat waves. So these are the things that need to come together, both the risk management and the more livable societies.
Do you think there's the political will to deal with this now in Europe?
I think politicians are unfortunately extremely short-termist much of the time. We've seen this even here in the UK, we've seen a desire not to upset the tabloids or the right-wing press on green issues, not to make it look like any kind of costs are being imposed, and that is limiting. I think really we need to have much more realistic conversations, again, based on the science, clear communication, listening to what people need at the community level and acting on it, you know, and showing where the trade-offs need to happen so that people are prepared for them.
Glada, thank you. And Samantha, Pauline and Margaret as well. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.